You see that, everyone? I'm calling a truce. I'm waving the white flag. This is a truce between me and these MCU movies because I'm officially done. I usually like to open these things with some kind of story or something just to make me look stupid and to break the ice a little bit, but in this case, just to fit the narrative of this boring, generic Black Widow movie, I have nothing to bring to the table.
This is my reaction. Yeah. Oh, the movie was fucking horrible.
And just a fair warning, this may be one of my more cynical videos, so if that's not what you're into, I'm sorry. If you're more into the Zendaya worship side of the channel, then maybe don't watch this, but I'll try my best to at least make it entertaining amid the cynicism. All right, with that little disclaimer out of the way, let's just get into this. So the MCU is something that I thought started very inspired, and the early movies felt like they were kind of their own things. The first Iron Man movie and the Incredible Hulk movie are both pretty distinct movies that I feel like are solid enough. But once we get on, especially with Iron Man 2, that's when all the really forced world-building connections start to come in, and the movies just begin to lose any real personality. I think Ant-Man was the first movie to really be the epitome of what I'm trying to describe here. This really generic, safe, stakeless, I already said generic, but just really bland movie where they just use quips as a way to kind of mask the lack of any personality or style. But I will give it to them. I will give Marvel this, that Infinity Snore and Endlame are both really great movies. Endlame is kind of flawed, but still a very solid conclusion to everything preceding it, and I liked it. It was a good ending, but it couldn't stay dead. Because then we get Spider-Man Far From a Good Movie, and that movie is so... Spider-Man Far From a Good Movie just feels like an afterthought. It feels like there was no real inspiration going into it. John Watts had nothing. He didn't even have the John Hughes 80s thing anymore. He just had nothing. It feels like Kevin Feige directed it. And then you might be saying, oh, well, WandaVision mixed it up. And sure, maybe for the first few episodes, but then after that, it just turns into your generic Marvel thing by the end. And the final action scene, like you're trying to tell me that was good. And Falcon and Winter Shitter, oh my god, that...
Oh my gosh.
Zemo was pretty funny, but outside of that, I got absolutely nothing out of that show. And I haven't been watching Loki. I don't care. I watched half of the first episode and I got bored, so I know people are liking it. That's cool. I'm glad you're enjoying the Easter eggs and whatever. It's just not my thing. And that brings us to Black Widow, which is the first theatrical MCU movie in 2 years, which by Marvel standards is a long time. And I'm not gonna lie to you, I didn't want to see this movie. I thought the trailer was pretty bad. And it looked exactly like everything I just have been despising about the MCU recently. It looked like that really stake-free, safe, boring movie that I had no interest in seeing. But one of my friends wanted to see it, so I was like, okay, I'll be social. I'll go see this movie. And, it sucked. And I don't want to do this whole fake mad thing where I'm like genuinely like, oh, this was awful because of this and this. This movie's shit. It's the worst thing ever.
It sucked!
It's not the worst thing ever. It's a movie. Like, you can watch it. You can probably enjoy it. You can go to the theater and I paid $7 to see this and maybe not hate your life for 2 hours. I mean, I kind of did, but I think this will be kind of a crowd pleaser. But that's what Marvel's confined to. They're confined to the bare minimum. They're confined to, oh, we know this formula works. We know this Ant-Man, Doctor Strange, Captain Marvel formula works. Let's make this movie as safe steak-free and generic as possible, just to make sure everyone's happy. And that's what they do. And yeah, that may go over well for other people, but for me, I have zero interest in stuff like this. And I'm not hating on the director of this at all. I know she was more of an indie director going into this, and Scarlett Johansson was the one who got her hired. So I actually admire giving her the opportunity to direct this movie. I just wish that Kevin Feige maybe gave her more freedom when it came to the story, or just any kind of artistic vision, because to me this just came off as the most structured, and I know I'm using the same words, but the most boring Marvel movie to date. Seriously, what happened? Like, what happened to getting directors who are actually unique and who have a distinct vision, or allowing them to have that vision? Because even Taika Waititi, from what it sounded like, his movie was only going to be 90 minutes, but then they realized, wow, this is not great. So then they threw all the quips in that actually gave the movie a personality, like all of Taika Waititi's really goofy humor. That's what made that movie, right? So for the Marvel to make these movies where they're not giving the directors freedom, you're just getting the same product, and it feels like Kevin Feige is just directing them all. I can't believe I'm going to say this, but DC is actually giving their directors more privileges and more opportunities than Marvel is right now, because Birds of Prey were not a great movie. That had a really unique and distinct vision to it. That had a lot of personality. And the Suicide Squad looks great. They were just like, okay, James, I was going to say James Wan. Okay, James Gunn, just do whatever you want. We don't care what you do with our characters. And, I mean, I'm going to say it, even Zack Snyder, who, yes, they did kind of screw up his Justice League, and I'm glad we got his version, but for Man of Steel and Batman v Superman, those were his movies. They gave him basically free reign, do whatever you want. And granted, they weren't great movies, but at least they had the nerves to give a director this opportunity, this chance to express themselves, to give their fuse their personality with the stuff on screen, so it doesn't just come off like a corporate product. And that's all these Marvel movies have turned into. It's just corporate products with zero motivation, zero inspiration, zero anything. So I just feel like I'm watching Mickey Mouse on screen with a Marvel flyer, like, oh, you'll watch this, you chill, come see our Marvel films. All right, I'm gonna I'm gonna try to reel myself back in a little bit. What did I like about this movie? Because, like I said, not a bad movie. It's just, well, it is a bad movie, but it's not a terrible movie. It sucks. It's a sucky movie, but you can do worse. So what did I like? Scarlett Johansson is fine. If you like the character in the other movies, she's here. Nothing about her performance blew me away, because I do think she's a great actress in other things, and in this she was fine. Florence Pugh was actually great. I liked her character a lot. She actually had a few Marvel quips that I found funny. There was one running joke about some kind of superhero pose that I actually thought was kind of cute. David Harbour's in it. Sometimes he's kind of funny, but otherwise I was kind of distracted by something about his character, which I'll get into in my negatives. I thought there was an opening montage, or opening credits, where the visuals of this scene I thought were kind of cool. I was like, wow, I'm watching a Marvel movie? Like, I was actually surprised. The song they chose for that montage ruined anything cool or eerie or interesting about it. They honest to God chose a dramatic, modern, Smells Like Teen Spirit cover, and oh my god, it completely destroyed any eerie or creepy tone that it could have had, and it just destroyed it completely. It was awful and not fitting at all. I felt like I was watching the Everybody Knows scene from the theatrical Justice League. And something that's kind of a nitpick, but not really because it's in the whole movie, there are a lot of Russian accents in this movie. A lot of fake Russian accents. And not from Natasha Romanoff, not from her, but from Florence Pugh, David Harbour, Rachel Weisz, and they're all pretty fake and bad. So when they're having these family conversations, which some people are saying are the better moments of the movie, and I could maybe give you that, it's kind of distracting to hear David Harbour trying to sound Russian. One of my biggest disappointments with this movie was not being able to see much from the institution where Black Widow was conditioned to become this giant assassin, because this is a really interesting concept that was hinted at in Age of Ultron when there's that really disturbing scene where she's on the hospital bed being wheeled through and they're like the girls with no mouths, which is obviously exaggerated because of the dream state. But I was like, wow, there's a lot of history here. This could be really fascinating to explore, and to explore Natasha's trauma and how negatively this impacted her, and it could lead to really emotionally satisfying moments. And it's weird because the whole movie is about trying to get rid of this red room that they call it, with all these trained assassins, and to kill the person responsible for all of this. That's the main driving factor. So you would think that they would try to maybe explore this a little bit more, but to me, they didn't. And I don't know if this was because they were confined to a PG-13 rating and they couldn't go anywhere all too interesting, or they couldn't go too brutal with it, but I think that it was just a giant missed opportunity. And I'm not saying they needed to have brutal violence against women or anything. That's definitely not what I'm saying. I don't need Gaspar Noé in my Black Widow movie, but I still feel like they were trying to earn those big dramatic moments where you would need to really feel that pain and anguish to feel those moments and to have them pay off, and they just did not at all to me. So when Black Widow's having this giant confrontation with the person responsible for all of her conditioning and all of this trauma, it's just, I'm numb. I felt nothing. And speaking of which, the villain of this movie, well, I guess you could say villains, kind of, because you have the guy behind the whole institution, and then you have Taskmaster. These villains, oh my god. If you thought Yellow Jacket was bad, you thought Malekith was a weak villain, wait till you get a load of this, because this is the absolute worst Marvel villain I've ever seen. Never did I feel threatened by this character or any intimidation or anything a villain is supposed to have. I just saw some void of nothingness. I felt like, I'm sorry I don't know the name, but the metallic giant thing in the first Thor movie, that thing was a better villain than Taskmaster, and that thing didn't even have a single line of dialogue. Taskmaster has one, and it's not a good line or anything. It's not anything memorable. It's just a line. It's so lame. And another thing I will say is that the whole movie is trying to go for that Bourne-style tone. So the action scenes kind of use the really quick, cutty editing, which I think looks awful. None of the action scenes impressed me because of this. It was really unfortunate, actually, because I wanted the Florence Pugh and Scarlett Johansson stuff to look great, but it just didn't. None of that looked good. And on top of that, because of the Bourne tone, they kind of have this sense of realism to it, or at least they're trying to go for a more realistic tone. But then they'll have really comic booky elements, and I understand it's a comic book movie. But when you're trying to combine those tones so much, I didn't feel like it worked at all, especially during Natasha's final confrontation with the person responsible for all this, when they're using all these weird plot elements to be like, oh, this is the reason why you can't do this yet, because of this tree or something. It's like, what? It's like, really? I could see this passing in a comic book, but translating that to screen, no.
No.
And that leads us into the third act, which I think could possibly be the worst third act of any MCU movie, because I'm trying to think, Black Panther was a pretty bad third act, but to be fair to that, even though the CGI was terrible, some of the emotional moments in that actually paid off and worked, especially for how they resolved Killmonger's character. Those are really great moments. In this, all we get is a giant CGI sky falling thing that looks absolutely horrendous, never just like nothing about it intrigued me. I was just kind of sitting there like, I hate to make this comparison. I felt like I was watching a Transformers movie where it's just noise, and none of it just really was intriguing or interesting at all. And especially given how everything leading up to this is supposed to be somewhat grounded, and you just get this giant overblown Marvel action scene that looks pretty bad. And another thing I forgot to mention is that they do this thing in the third act at least 2 times where they cut back to a scene in the past to explain why a certain twist or something makes sense. And to me, that's just the laziest form of writing, and you can make that pay off. Like, The Prestige would have moments where they would show in the past, like, why this makes sense or what actually occurred to lead up to it. But it didn't work. It felt really lazy and tacked on, and as a really stupid way to trick the audience when, like, you're only really tricking the audience by not showing us that information before. So that's pretty much all I have to say about this movie. I thought it was the most boring Marvel movie by far. I don't know if it's the worst one. I'd still say Iron Man 2 is worse, but I think I like Captain Marvel a little bit more because what I'll give Captain Marvel is that I liked the 90s aesthetic of it, and it helped it from being too generic. You know what I mean? It still had that structure that I hate and despise, but it still had a little bit of personality or energy to it that it was completely devoid in Black Widow. And I'm not just comparing the two because they're both female-led Marvel movies. They just, unfortunately, happen to be my least favorite movies in this series, which sucks because I want these movies to be great. And I think Ms. Marvel will be really good. I'm excited for that, even though it's from the director of Bad Boys for Life, so maybe not. But I want these all to be great, and I want directors to be able to have their unique visions in a giant Marvel film. But I just can't. Yeah, I'm upset. 50,000 on my head's disrespect. I don't know how we got here. I don't know how the MCU turned into such generic trash. But hey, Marvel has a lot going on. Maybe Shang-Chi and Eternals will be awesome.
No, yes, he does have to hire.
Oh, look at this with Ahsoka.
I was proud of that joke.